think the other thing that leaders really, really need is space and time. So they are being hammered every which way. And, one of the things that, again, I think the cards draw attention to is you as a human being, not just you as a leader, but what's your health like? What's your sleep like? What's your, exercise like? Do you have a bottle of wine every night? And what's the impact of that? So really kind of trying to pay attention to the whole being, not just the person at work.
Hi, I'm Donna.
And I'm Di. We are the Double Ds, and welcome to the Discovery Diaries.
We acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast. We pay our respects to the elders, past and present, and acknowledge their spiritual connection to family and storytelling.
Today's episode, we are going to hear from Tammy Tansley, who is a leadership coach, consultant, author and co-founder of Neuro Nudges, a brain-based approach to creating meaningful, lasting change. Tammy works with leaders and teams to cut through complexity, rewire habits and lead with clarity and impact. And Neuro Nudges cards support science-backed shifts that build the mental flexibility and self-awareness needed for real behavioural breakthroughs. Sounds promising, doesn't it? But strengthening our resilience, especially in times of pressure and change, is something that we're going to hear more about today. Tammy, welcome. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you, Di.
And if people could see you, they'd see you in your hot pink glasses and your hot pink jumper, looking very trendy and...
Very matching.
Very matching, yes, very matching.
Forgot my hot pink shoes.
Oh, I did. I forgot the stripes on the Adidas shoes as well. Tammy, it's lovely to have you with us. And as you'll know, we are really focusing this series around resilience and courage, but really trying to equip people with tools. And so when I was thinking about guests for the series, you obviously came to mind because you have started with some co-founders an amazing product or suite of products called Neuro Nudges.
We have.
So we'd love us to hear from you about how that started and what's it all about.
Sure, thank you. So Neuro Nudges started probably from the most unlikely of sources, and that was a group project. So normally when you hear the word group project, there is a collective sigh of horror. And I have to say this was the absolute exception to that. So there were 4 of us. We were in a program that brought together both neuroscience and coaching. And the idea behind the group project was to bring it to life. So bring coaching and neuroscience to life in a way that makes sense for people. So that was our project. We started off, we were going to have a snakes and ladders type game, which showed the kind of highs and lows of life, and obviously ran into a few trademark issues along the way.
Yeah.
But what we discovered, Di, was that way beyond kind of once the project had been done and dusted, was there was such a joy and a passion, if you like, between what started as the 4 of us and then became the 3 of us around sharing science-backed tools that made sense for people and were easy and accessible for people to be able to change and to grow and to develop. And so we took that kind of initial snakes and ladders kind of idea, and it evolved, it developed into the neuroscience coaching cards, which are the Neuro Nudges that you have in your hand. So one of the things we were thinking about when we were pivoting from the snakes and ladders to the cards was being able to have something that was really tactile, that people could, I think people like to be able to play and to be able to touch things. You're both coaches, so you know that we wanted to make coaching accessible because coaching is extraordinary, but it's not accessible. And so we wanted to be able to have a product that people could use themselves to self-coach. We wanted to have a product that leaders, because we know so much kind of informal coaching happens within the workplaces, that could equip leaders who didn't necessarily have the skills to be able to just hit the road running, if you like. And we wanted to have a product that enabled those, thousands and thousands of really curious coaches out there to add something additional to their toolkit, which is why we added the neuroscience. So we brought all of that together and Neuro Nudges was born.
Tammy, can you just describe for our listeners exactly what these Neuro Nudges cards are?
Yeah.
We're looking at a packet now, but for people that can't see them, like how many cards are there, how many categories?
Thanks, Donna. So there are 70 cards in 7 different categories, and we can go into the categories in a moment. But so each of the cards has a coaching question and it has a behavioural nudge. So the idea, as I said, to be able to have those different ways, either of self-coaching or in the workplace or to be using as a coach. So here's your coaching question. Here's a behavioural nudge that relates to that coaching question. And then when you flip it over, there's the neuroscience. So the why. What is it that your brain is doing that enables this nudge, if you like? So what we love about them is that it doesn't matter, what it is that you're coaching on, and the 7 categories are really nice and broad. There's something there for everyone in terms of being able to move them forward in terms of growth and development.
Yeah. So the categories are self-awareness, relationships, goals, motivation, habits, emotions, and health.
Yes.
And I'm curious about how did you come up with those categories?
Great question. Great question. So right back at the very beginning when we were doing Snakes and Ladders, we were looking at what makes you go up and what makes you go down.
Yeah.
What are the things that contribute to growth? Things like habits, really positive habits, but also less positive habits can contribute to going down. Goals absolutely can contribute to you going up. We also know goals done badly can contribute to going down. Relationships, same. So all of them, we were looking at what is it that makes a rich life, if you like.
Yeah.
And we had our original kind of Snakes and Ladders checkerboard, if you like, from memory had something like 100 different categories, questions, and we started grouping them all together, and these were the categories that we came up with.
Yeah. And so, what are you finding is the response in terms of if somebody was to pick up a pack, what are your customers, as it were, telling you about how they're using them and how useful they are?
So I think it really depends on how they're using them. So let me talk about them from different ways. So I was just talking to a leader the other day, and they were using them as a team tool within their team. And so they used it almost as an icebreaker for their team meetings. So really nice, simple kind of, 5-minute exercise type thing. One of the things I should have said, Donna, when I was explaining about the cards is that on the back of the cards, I said there was a neuroscience. That actually gets you, there's a QR code there that gets you to the back end of our website that has a whole lot of additional resources, additional information about neuroscience, but also about coaching and about the application of it. And so this particular leader was using it almost as a kind of, lunch and learn type sort of scenario, but as an icebreaker. So we've heard lots of examples of that. We've heard one of the other things that you get when you join the Neuro Nudges community is you get access to all these different templates and resources. And so one of the templates is how to have a difficult conversation. And so I've heard of leaders who are using the cards and using our template around how to have a difficult conversation to prepare for that conversation, which is absolutely fantastic. And again, one of the things that we love about this is you don't have to go on a fancy training course. You don't have to be an accredited coach. You don't have to go and spend thousands and thousands of dollars. It's all there for you. You pick up your card, you pick up your template, and it's kind of intuitive and it's thoughtful, and it's based on the fact that we have all been in workplaces for many, many decades, and we know how this stuff kind of goes down.
We have no idea what you're talking about, of course, Tammy. But I love the fact that you've used that example of how to have a difficult conversation, because I kind of think that's what it means to be human.
Exactly.
You have to have difficult conversations. Exactly. Sometimes the conversations are with yourself and sometimes they're with other people, but we can't avoid them, or we can avoid them, but it makes life pretty miserable if we do.
And that self-coaching conversation, so, another example that we've had recently is of people doing exactly that. So, having some tricky conversations with themselves and using the cards to actually self-coach themselves through it, which, is much more difficult to hide from yourself than it is from someone else. So, really, really powerful stuff.
It's a really interesting concept, actually, Donna. I was just thinking about the idea of resilience and self-coaching, and a lot of what we hear in people's stories and some of the tools that people are starting to share with us, often it is about that self-coaching. But I hadn't really thought about that as a connection to resilience, which is how good am I at doing that for myself?
Absolutely.
So I hear that these cards are a real opportunity for people to pick one out of the box. So if we were to pick one up and you gave us an example, what would one be for us?
Okay, so I'm picking up the one from the emotions category now, and it says, in a year from now, how will your current worries be impacting you? So that's the coaching question. And then the nudge is reflect on the 3 Ps, permanence, pervasiveness and personalisation. Will it last forever? Will it affect every part of your life? Is it about you? Martin Seligman's fantastic work. And then we turn to the neuroscience, and we know that a strong sense of agency and self-efficacy can boost resilience by helping one adapt and overcome obstacles and by encouraging growth and development. So we've got the coaching question, really making us think about it. We've got the kind of the science with the positive psych stuff from Seligman, and then we've got our neuroscience.
Yeah, really, I love that example. I know in my own life, that's one of the reasons I've called my small business Donna's Balcony Views, because when you're involved in a difficult situation like I have been recently, you get so caught up in it, and it's only if you step outside of it on the balcony,
yes,
or as you say, kind of think, in a few years' time, you would have got through this. I never would have guessed my situation would last, nearly 3 years. But it is really, really interesting.
I think it's such a useful way of clearing up some of the clutter in our minds. And look, some things, may well be affecting us in a year's time or 2 years' time, but perhaps they're the things that we should be focusing on, as opposed to the myriad of the thousands of things that we worry about that literally probably by tomorrow won't even be applicable.
Yeah, and you can focus your attention on some of these really important things and not worry so much about small things, like if there was a traffic jam or if your coffee's late and things like that.
One of the things that I do, which I'm sure you both do as well, is morning pages of journaling. And, one of the really interesting things about doing that is the number of times that, I don't often go back and read it, but when I do go back and read it, the worries that I have that are so detailed and, a bit melodramatic, let's be honest, almost never come to pass. Almost never. And we're talking days, a week later or whatever. So, so much energy. So if we're talking about resilience, and we know that resilience is largely about energy and the energy that we've got to be able to do stuff, let's get rid of the stuff that we don't need to be worrying about.
Tammy, I am really interested in your definition of resilience as well, because you've mentioned part of it there, which is, that finite energy. It's not about time management. It's about energy management.
Yep.
How else would you define resilience, do you think, either from your own experience or those that you coach?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of bits to it. So one is kind of the how long does it take to kind of bounce back? What is bouncing back to? So what's your baseline? And we were talking about this before we started chatting today, which is there's something about resilience which is there's almost a kind of like a technicolor view of it, which is that life needs to be, unicorns, even if you're going through a really, really difficult time. And I think the reality of that is just rubbish, to be honest. And there's something about resilience which is acknowledging, actually, I'm going through a bit of an ordinary time right now, and it is quite okay to just be doing the absolute best I can. If that looks like just kind of getting through it, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me of the Viktor Frankl quote about, you fully face into the reality of your situation and yet, you still have hope.
Exactly.
But for a lot of us, I think it's actually, if I do face into it, that's going to be so overwhelming and so uncertain and so unknown. We just feel like we'll be floored by it. And so we'd rather kind of avoid and numb and do all the things that happen.
Yep.
But that ability to fully face into it, and I think you're so right, like this myth about we should be able to thrive in any circumstances, I'm just not sure that, that really sets us up well in the way that we should be thinking about, what it means to be a human. And well, it's patently untrue. It's patently untrue because we look around and there's plenty of people who are not having a very good time for a whole myriad of reasons. And so to kind of have this kind of, rainbows and unicorn view of life is, I think it's just unrealistic.
Just an example in my own life was in March I had a very, very difficult time with my work-related case, and I was really hammered. And I was in a terrible state, and I got through that, and then my doctor ended up giving me a month off the case. And she said at the end she couldn't believe in that month how much I'd improved in my mental health. And she almost said that was kind of her definition of resilience, was the fact that having a break, I was able to recover. And she said that's because I've built up a lot of resilience over these past couple of years. And that ties in a lot with what your definition of resilience is as well, this bouncing back. But when it is a tough time, you are basically in survival mode.
Yeah.
So, so it's really interesting.
And I think it's just being realistic about that. So, whilst you're having a tough time, are you going to be running marathons? Are you going to be having a pristine house? Are you going to be having all the stuff that we think of? Maybe not. Maybe that's your coping mechanism, and maybe so. But I think the expectation that when life gives you, trickiness, that everything else should remain the same is just a bit unrealistic.
And I'm also really curious about the tangibility, the tactileness of the product that you've created, and thinking about Donna's point of having a break.
Yep.
What's your stories, Tammy, of how the usefulness of having an actual physical product in our hand rather than a digital device or even a conversation? What is it about this physical product that you're finding?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's really interesting because so many people have asked us for a digital version, and we've been a bit reluctant to go there yet. We'll talk about version 2.
Sure.
But I think what is really important about the tactile version is that there's something about putting something in front of you. So whether you're doing it from a coaching perspective, so you're working with a client, whether you're doing it from a leader perspective and you're working with an employee, whether you're doing it with yourself, you're putting something in front of you, and so your attention is going to that. If we're on a phone, if we're doing it digitally, certainly I have to speak for myself because my attention span is about that of a gnat, I have to say. And so,
Welcome to my world, Tammy.
So you're on your phone and you're doing your nice little self-coaching, and then, notification, viral reel on, kitten, and, we're down a rabbit hole. So there's something I think about just, to your point, Donna, about the break, and even if that's a micro break of we're being intentional, we're putting the cards down, we're looking at it, our attention is focused on something, we're giving our brain a break just for a few seconds to be able to think about what it is that we're actually trying to do.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by my weekly newsletter, which is Donna's Balcony Views newsletter. This is a short weekly free newsletter that I write with the theme of building resilience and improving well-being. It contains 2 things I've experienced, 2 things I've learnt from others, such as speakers, podcasts, books or articles, and a personal story from someone else about what they do for their resilience or their well-being.
What I love about your newsletter, Donna, is it's really bite-sized and it's extremely easy to read. In a couple of minutes, I've got some great resources and some little tips that I might try. And I read it this morning again, and it just gave me some idea of what I could focus on, some morning questions and some evening questions, and I'm really enjoying it.
If you would like to sign up for my weekly newsletter, my free weekly newsletter, go to my personal website, which is www.donnasbalconyviews.com.au, or on Instagram at Donna's Balcony Views.
And you obviously work a lot with leaders, Tammy, as I do, and I wonder, what do you think leaders need the most at the moment that would really support their resilience?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, that I think one of the biggest issues in workplaces that I observe is emotional dysregulation. And that then manifests itself in a whole lot of, unfortunately, usually unhelpful sort of ways. So I think one of the things that the Neuro Nudges cards does is really enable people to start to do that self-regulation, to really get in touch with their own emotional intelligence, which is another really critical skill, I think, and really start to build their emotional vocabulary and their emotional repertoire to really critical things. I think the other thing that leaders really, really need is space and time.
Yeah.
So they are being hammered. every which way. And, one of the things that, again, I think the cards draw attention to is you as a human being, not just you as a leader, but what's your health like? What's your sleep like? What's your, exercise like? Do you have a bottle of wine every night? And what's the impact of that? So really kind of trying to pay attention to the whole being, not just the person at work.
Yeah, I really feel for our leaders at this stage and age of there's so much that they have to deal with, even just the changes in employment law and psychosocial safety. It's not that those things are bad, but the impact of feeling like you've got to be everything to everyone and have all the answers and cover all the bases, it's an enormous pressure, and we don't have the community around us that we once had that scaffolds some of that as well. And I wonder if you noticed that as well.
Absolutely. So, I think the psychosocial thing is really interesting because so important in so many ways, but I feel like we've almost weaponised it now. And now we're saying, you have to create this environment of psychosocial safety, but we haven't address the systemic issues within workplaces that often go to psychosocial hazards. And so leaders are being tasked with creating this sort of safe workplace, rightly so. That is a fundamental part of their job. But there are so many really systemic issues that are just being ignored. And I think that's really tricky.
So I think it's great that you've got something to offer leaders, but also if they just wanted to, if they didn't even see themselves as a leader, they could do that self-coaching, just buying a pack, as it were.
And I think the other thing that we haven't mentioned so far, so, we talked about the cards, we talked about the website, it's got all those additional resources, and then the templates that have got that are really nice and easy for lots of leaders. I think probably the most joyous thing about Neuro Nudges is our community. So once a month we get together, and there are people from all over the world. So these people come together for an hour once a month, and we share and we talk, and it is ego-free, and it is generous, and it is compassionate, and it is all about how do we grow, how do we develop, how do we make the world a better place. So I think if I'm a leader and even if I sit on that call and I say nothing, you cannot help but come away being inspired by people going, here's a tool, have you tried this, have you thought about this, here's my example of this, all done with just generosity and compassion. It is nurturing, it is, there aren't enough kind of superlative adjectives to describe the feeling of people just coming together just to do good.
Is that a Zoom meeting?
It's just a Zoom meeting.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So just really, really lovely. And again, just thinking about how can we support people beyond just the cards themselves.
Just along the lines of what you and Di have just been talking about, with it being quite difficult for leaders at the moment, do you find that leaders can be very hard on themselves? Because I find sometimes that people are a lot more lenient on other people than they are on themselves. They can be very hard on themselves. And as you said, if they're going through a difficult time, they can kind of start chastising themselves. And, so how do you find that?
I think it falls into two categories, actually. I think absolutely you've got the people who do that, and they're often the ones that I, end up coaching, is because, they come because they're like, how do I make this better? And then you almost have the opposite end of the camp, which is, well, it's too hard. I'm not going to do anything about it. So it seems to be quite polarising, I think, would be my observation.
And Tammy, I'm curious as well about, we've talked a bit about the sort of product and the outcomes that it brings, but I imagine you've had to start a business, a mini business here, maybe not even a mini one, maybe it's going to be much bigger than that, and there's great ambitions, and I'm curious about that. But where has resilience shown up in the business process for you as well?
Yeah, good question. So all of us have our own businesses. In fact, Catherine, who's in Tasmania, has multiple businesses, one of which is a gin distillery. So
is it what?
A gin distillery.
Oh, a gin distillery.
So
the best kind of business.
Excellent gin she makes. So and whiskey, I think, now as well. So we've all kind of been got our own businesses, we've got our own lives. So starting a business, and I should say that the three of us now, so Catherine, Sue, and I, have never actually all met in real life. So we are. What are we in? We're kind of 18 months, 24 months into our Neuro Nudges journey, and we have done this all over Zoom and WhatsApp. So that's kind of probably resilience in and of itself, because you can imagine the communications, the miscommunications, the things that have gone along the way there. But what has been, it's been an interesting journey. So, I mean, I have never created a business that has a product. So we had to learn about printing. We had to learn about dealing with people in China. That's a whole, category in and of itself. So there were lots and lots of learnings along the way. We had another business partner initially who has chosen to move off. And, so bringing 4 people together who don't know each other, different values, different skill sets, building something and growing something enormously challenging. So we kind of navigated through that. And then, as I said, our 4th business partner elected to leave. And so that created a different dynamic for us. And we're like, okay, so where to now? What do we do with our business now? A nice dynamic in a sense that I think these trickinesses that come to life, would come to us all in life, which they do, provide a really nice inflection point for us around, do I want to keep going with this? And so a really nice kind of opportunity for us all, the remaining three of us, to look inside and say, is this something that I want to keep going? Is it giving me enough of actually what, because a lot of work, as I said, we've all got our other businesses, we've all got, busy lives outside of this. Is this something that is worth it? So great opportunity to kind of reflect on that. And then collectively we decided, yes, it is. And particularly because of that community that I described, that's so joyous to us. And so, now we're pivoting again.
Okay. So, and can you give us some insight into what that is going to be?
Probably the focus that we're really looking at is all 3 of us have got a really strong positive psych love. And so we really want to kind of look at the cards again through a positive psych lens and say, what needs to happen, what needs to shift to really put that nice positive psych lens on top of it. So there will be version 2 of the cards. There will be many more resources to support it. And we're really looking at how do we grow that community, because the thing that we have found is that is what makes these cards so powerful, is that you become part of something that is, you're hearing from someone in Canada, or you're hearing from someone in Switzerland about something that they're doing that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. It's so extraordinary. So so that's version 2, still kind of playing, still looking at what's worked, what hasn't worked, but really exciting times.
And the bit of, I guess, one of the definitions I often hold on to came out of the resilience dynamic work in Scotland, actually, and it's about our capacity to adapt.
Exactly.
And respond to change. Yeah. And there you are pivoting and saying, actually, how do we embrace the learning from that and the juncture that it brings us to pause and go, is this what we really want, out of what could have been quite a difficult situation and I'm sure wasn't easy, but then also actually, where's the opportunity?
Where is the opportunity?
Yeah.
And I love that about resilience, and I love that about, the trickiness of life, and so hard when you're in the middle of it. And I don't want to be Pollyanna, because God knows we've all been there, and there's nothing more annoying than someone saying, well, what's the good side of this? But where there is just that moment to say, what does this opportunity present? So powerful, I think.
That's so interesting, Tammy. For people that don't have the cards and maybe don't know a lot about psychology and coaching and all of that type of thing where you're a real expert, what would be 1 or 2 things that people could start thinking about, or a question they might be able to ask themselves if they are going through a difficult time, just to get them started in this kind of self-coaching arena?
Right. Well, I'm going to pick up my cards. And all right, so this is the next one, okay? This is emotions. When you feel stressed or overwhelmed, what are some strategies that you typically use to cope? So that's a beautiful self-coaching one, because super easy to lie to somebody else, much more difficult to lie to yourself. So, what are those coping strategies? Are they, I go for a walk every morning on, the beach with my dog. How wholesome is that? Or is it that I have a bottle of wine every night? Probably less wholesome. Is it that I do my, journaling every morning and it leaves me free and, easy? Or do I spend hours and hours kind of in a feedback loop in my mind? So, really simple thing that you can do.
I know I've sort of written down a few things that have helped me, and so I know if I'm feeling like I'm getting down, my top 2 things is, one is to go and exercise, especially outside, and then to contact a friend or something and have that social connection. So that
absolutely.
For me is
absolutely.
something. So I suppose it's what you're saying is you think it through how you've gotten through a previous difficult time. And
and one of the things that, I think the cards are really good at is really drawing attention to those things like exercise and connection and relationships, and really kind of getting you to kind of think through those things, and animals. Having an animal. Because,
I do miss my dog enormously, I have to say. And I was having this conversation with my son, Tammy, who's in Canada, and the house that he's in has a dog. And I said, I'm so glad you've got a dog where you are, because you get to cuddle it and, you don't have your family around me, but you've got a dog. And he said, but she's not very cuddly, Mum.
I think one of the other things, just hearing you say about the exercise piece, one of the things that when we first got started, we spent a lot of time diving into the work of Dr. Andrew Huberman. So I don't know if you've both come across him, but a pretty well-known neuroscientist. And, geez, he does some great evidence-based work around things that you can do immediately that will make a difference. So, getting that light first thing in the morning, getting the light at night. When are you having your coffee? Coffee can be good, but, when are you having it? So,
and the differences between men and women as well. What we need, protein before exercise, all these things. Yep. He's got such a big range of guests. So,
he does.
We can put his podcast in the show notes as well.
Just on the pets, I don't have pets, but I do love dogs. And I found even just walking down to the park and you can see dogs and you can see, little kids playing and I find that can be very, very good if you're having quite a difficult time as well. So it's something very small but something everyone can do really.
And it's so interesting. So this is the first time I've had a dog since I was a child, so quite a few decades in between. But there's something about when you go take your dog for a walk, the way that you walk and the way that you interact with the community is so different to when you are walking by yourself. So you say hello to everybody. People, say, oh, your dog's cute and, cuddle the dog, whatever. There's something about connection there which is just so interesting. Whereas, my observation of people who are dogless and they're walking is they're a bit more focused. They're a bit more it's about exercise rather than about connection.
And I wonder, Tammy, if it has something to do with putting something between us as well.
Yeah.
That strikes me. You were talking about that with the cards.
Yeah, nice.
It gives you something between you to talk over or to observe together or to get it out of our own heads, And I wonder if animals provide a bit of that as well.
And I think they're also, to your point, Donna, about the kids as well, I think there's something about joy and, observing an animal or a child just in its natural state, which is joy without all the rubbish that as grown-ups we have on us, which is a bit freeing and, quite delightful to look at, really.
So, Tammy, we've got so many tips in there and if we will share how people can get hold of Neuro Nudges, but thinking about resilience and thinking about Neuro Nudges and your hopes for it, what would you love our listeners to know? Is there anything we haven't talked about yet that you'd like to share?
I think this is what I would like listeners to know is whether it's with Neuro Nudges or not, there is always hope. There are always, I think, even if you are going through a really pretty ordinary time in your life, eventually that time will pass. Eventually. We don't necessarily know how long it's going to be, but hanging in there and having hope and availing yourself of, the myriad and myriad of resources and connection that's available. I was listening to your last guest, Ali, who was, what an extraordinary man, and just really thinking about, how do you get that connection? How do you reach out? And very, very difficult if you're in a bit of a tricky scenario. But just taking that moment as if you possibly can to see what is available out there to me to support.
Yes, and we've definitely found that even with our podcast. Some of our guests have thought, they're alone in their stories, but when they've shared their stories, they said they've had a lot of people reaching out and saying they made them feel that they're not alone.
Yeah.
So even if you are quite isolated, you can find other podcasts.
Exactly.
All sorts of...
I think the extraordinary thing about where we're living in this age is on the one hand, we talk about the loneliness epidemic. On the other hand, there are so many opportunities out there, aren't there? Your podcast, all the extraordinary podcasts, social media for good, not for evil, and, the rest of us as human beings.
So, Tammy, we've loved having you on. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. And we look with, hope at what is version 2 of Neuro Nudges. But at the moment, if our listeners wanted to get a discount on the current ones, what's the score there?
Yes, so we will give you a discount code, which you can pop in the show notes. So
fantastic. So that's 70 thought-provoking coaching questions and tips backed by neuroscience with actionable insights for sustained personal growth. Sounds pretty good to me. Tammy, thank you so much for joining us. I'm always inspired by other women entrepreneurs, Donna, who at, a certain age pivot, change or add to their business. It's so inspiring to me, and Tammy's done that. She's gone and done some personal development. It's formed this group of people who now have a product on the market, and just to hear that joy that's come through from the community that's now coming through, very inspiring.
Absolutely, and it sort of reminded me of us actually, because we also had an idea about the podcast, and it's a good feeling when you have an idea, work together with someone and make it come to fruition, and that's what Tammy's done with the Neuro Nudges as well.
And Donna, it's maybe a good time to reinforce it. We're up to 5,000 downloads.
Yes.
So I think we should celebrate that.
Absolutely, and by the time people listen to this, maybe a lot more than that as well. Okay, thanks.
We hope you've loved today's episode. We always enjoy bringing these to you. We'd love to grow the podcast, and one of the ways that we can do that is to ask you to like us, to follow us, to give us a review, but also just to share it with your friends and family.